The night I lost my job, my parents didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't ask what happened. They didn't even let me finish explaining. My father pointed at the door and said, "If you're not earning, you're not staying here." My mother stood beside him and nodded. Within an hour, I was sleeping in my car with everything I owned packed into 2 suitcases. I thought that was the worst night of my life. I was wrong, because 3 weeks later, my parents arrived at a luxury beach house for a family vacation and froze when they learned exactly who owned it. My name is Olivia Parker, and I was 33 years old when I lost my job, my home, and my place in my family, all in the same night. At least, that's what my parents thought. The email arrived at 10:17 on a Thursday morning. Corporate restructuring notice. I already knew what it meant. The company had been cutting departments for months. People disappeared every week. Entire teams vanished overnight. Still, knowing it was coming didn't make it easier. By noon, my manager had scheduled a video meeting. By 12:15, I was unemployed. 7 years of loyalty. 7 years of late nights. 7 years of solving problems nobody else wanted. Gone in 15 minutes. The severance package was reasonable. The manager was apologetic. None of it mattered. Losing a job feels personal even when it isn't. I packed my desk, said goodbye to a few coworkers, and drove home in silence. The entire ride, I kept replaying the conversation in my head, trying to figure out what I could have done differently, trying to convince myself everything would be okay. I should have known my family wouldn't see it that way. When I walked into my parents' house that evening, Mom was sitting at the kitchen table. Dad was watching television. My younger sister, Sarah, was scrolling through her phone. Nobody noticed something was wrong. Not at first. "I got laid off today," I said. The room fell quiet. For about 3 seconds. Then Sarah sighed dramatically. "Seriously?" I blinked. "Seriously what?" She dropped her phone onto the table. "That's terrible timing." Dad frowned. "Timing for what?" Sarah threw her hands into the air. "My car payment is due next week." I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. For the past 2 years, I had been quietly helping Sarah whenever she got herself into financial trouble. Credit cards, missed payments, emergency expenses. There was always something. And somehow, every family discussion ended with me being expected to help. Mom looked concerned. "Not for me. For Sarah." "How much are you short?" Sarah named the amount. Dad rubbed his forehead. Then he looked at me. "Well, that's obviously not happening now." I stared at him, still trying to process what was happening. I had just lost my job, and somehow the conversation had already become about Sarah's car payment. Nobody asked how I was feeling. Nobody asked what my plans were. Nobody asked if I needed help. Sarah crossed her arms. "So, what am I supposed to do?" That was the moment something inside me finally clicked. Not broke. Clicked. Because suddenly I understood my role in the family. I wasn't the daughter they worried about. I was the daughter they depended on. There was a difference. A huge difference. Dad stood up from the table. "Maybe this is the wake-up call everyone needed." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He looked around the room, then pointed toward the hallway. "It means your sister needs stability right now." I honestly thought he was still talking about Sarah's car payment. He wasn't. "You've got savings," he said. "You're resourceful. You'll figure things out." My stomach tightened. "Dad." Then he said something I'll never forget. "Your sister needs this house more than you do." The room went silent. Mom didn't object. Sarah didn't object. Nobody objected. Because apparently they had already discussed this possibility before I even got home. Dad walked into my bedroom. A few moments later, I heard drawers opening, then boxes moving. He was packing my things. Actually packing them. I stood frozen in the kitchen, unable to believe what I was seeing. Mom finally spoke. Maybe some space would be good. Space. That was the word she chose. Not support. Not compassion. Space. Sarah looked annoyed rather than guilty. "Who's going to help with my car payment now?" she muttered. Nobody corrected her. Nobody told her how selfish she sounded. I quietly walked to my room, packed a suitcase, collected a few personal items, and left. No argument. No yelling. No dramatic speech. Just silence. Because there was something my family didn't know. 3 years earlier, while working my corporate job, I had started a consulting business on the side.
Slowly, quietly,
Patiently, the company grew, then grew again. Eventually, it became successful enough to operate independently. I never talked about it, never posted about it, never bragged. And through that company, I had purchased something else. A beach house. A beautiful property overlooking the ocean. Legally owned by the business. Completely paid for. Nobody in my family knew it existed. As I drove away from my parents' house that night, I said nothing about any of it. I rented a temporary apartment and focused on my next move. Meanwhile, life continued for everyone else. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. At first, I assumed it might be an apology. It wasn't. Instead, she wrote, "Good news. We're leaving Friday for a family beach vacation. A friend arranged access to an incredible beach house. Sarah is so excited." I stared at the message, then slowly read it again, because I recognized the address she had attached. And suddenly, I knew exactly where my family was going. I stared at my mother's message for nearly a full minute. Then I read it again.
and again.
There was no mistake. The address she had attached belonged to my beach house. My beach house. The property I had purchased through Parker Coastal Consulting almost 2 years earlier. The same property my family didn't even know existed. For a brief moment, I considered calling Mom. I considered asking questions. I considered warning them. Instead, I put my phone down and smiled, because I genuinely wanted to know how this was happening. A few minutes later, another message appeared. This time from Sarah. Not to me directly. To social media. A photo of a suitcase. A pair of sunglasses. A beach emoji. And a caption. Much needed luxury getaway. Sometimes life rewards the right people. I couldn't help laughing. 3 days earlier, she'd been asking who would pay her car loan. Now she was acting like a travel influencer. I closed the app and went back to work. The next 2 days were surprisingly entertaining. Sarah posted constantly.
A countdown.
Shopping bags. New outfits. Photos of expensive luggage she probably couldn't afford. Meanwhile, I stayed completely silent. Friday finally arrived. Around noon, Mom sent another message. We just arrived. This place is unbelievable. A photo followed. Oceanfront balcony. White railings. Blue water stretching endlessly toward the horizon. My balcony. 5 minutes later came another picture. The living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Stone fireplace. Custom furniture. My living room. Then came Sarah's posts. Lots of them. She posed beside the pool. On the deck. Near the private beach path. Every caption sounded more confident than the last. Family deserves the best. Creating memories. Luxury feels good. The irony was almost painful. By late afternoon, I decided it was time. I drove toward the coast. The beach community sat about 90 minutes outside the city. A private development with controlled access and ocean views. The property itself sat on one of the highest points overlooking the shoreline. I still remembered the first time I'd seen it. The moment I knew I wanted it. Not because it was luxurious. Because it represented freedom. Everything I had quietly built. Everything I had earned myself. The security gate opened automatically when my vehicle approached. The system recognized my registration. A few minutes later, I pulled into the driveway. Several cars were already parked outside. My parents' SUV. Sarah's car. A rental vehicle. I parked beside them, then stepped out. The ocean breeze felt cool against my face. For a second, I simply stood there, looking at the house. My house. Then I walked toward the front entrance. The moment I stepped onto the deck, the sliding door opened. Sarah appeared first. Her expression immediately changed. Olivia? I smiled.
Hey, Sarah.
The color drained from her face. Behind her, Mom appeared. Then Dad. Both looked equally confused. What are you doing here? Mom asked. I shrugged casually. Just visiting. Sarah frowned. Visiting who? Before I could answer, another voice interrupted. Miss Parker. Everyone turned. The property manager was walking up the path. Thomas had managed the property for nearly 18 months. Reliable, professional, and completely unaware of the family drama unfolding around him. He approached with a friendly smile. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Thomas. Dad looked between us, clearly confused. Sarah looked even more confused. Thomas reached into a leather portfolio. I have the updated documents you requested. My mother's eyebrows lifted. Documents? Thomas nodded, then handed me a folder. Ownership records, maintenance reports, and next quarter's property statements. The silence that followed was incredible. I accepted the folder calmly. Thomas then reached into his pocket. Also, your new key cards arrived.
He handed them to me.
Everything has been updated under your account. Nobody said a word. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not Sarah. They simply stared. Thomas looked around awkwardly, apparently realizing something strange was happening. Well, he said carefully, if you need anything regarding the property, just let me know. Thank you. He nodded and walked away. The second he disappeared down the path, every eye turned toward me. Sarah looked completely lost. Dad looked stunned. Mom seemed unable to process what she'd just heard. Finally, Sarah spoke. Her voice sounded almost nervous. She pointed toward the folder in my hands, then toward the house, then back at me. Wait. The confidence she displayed all week was gone. Completely gone. Olivia. She swallowed hard. What exactly is going on? For several seconds, nobody spoke. The ocean breeze drifted across the deck. Waves crashed softly in the distance. And my family stood frozen, staring at me as if they'd never seen me before. Sarah was the first to recover.
No.
She shook her head. No, that's not possible. I looked down at the folder Thomas had handed me, then back at her. What part? The ownership part. Her voice rose slightly. The manager acted like this place belongs to you. I smiled. Because it does. The silence that followed felt endless. Dad blinked. Mom actually sat down in one of the patio chairs. Neither seemed capable of processing what they had just heard. Sarah laughed nervously, the kind of laugh people make when reality refuses to match their expectations. Stop joking. I'm not joking. I opened the folder and handed it to Dad. He flipped through the documents. Property records, ownership certificates, business filings. Every page carried the same name, Parker Coastal Consulting, the company I had quietly built over the last several years. Dad's face slowly changed. Confusion, shock, disbelief, then realization. You own the company? I nodded. Yes. Mom stared at me. What company? I couldn't help noticing the irony. For years, nobody had asked much about my life. Now, they had questions.
Lots of them.
The consulting company I started while working my corporate job. Dad looked stunned. You never told us. I tried. Nobody responded, because we all knew that was true. Whenever I talked about work, the conversation somehow returned to Sarah. Sarah folded her arms. How successful can a consulting company be? I pointed toward the house. Her expression immediately hardened. The answer was standing all around her. The beach house wasn't just expensive. It was worth several times more than the home my parents lived in. Mom finally found her voice. When did this happen? Years ago. Dad stared at the ocean, almost talking to himself. You lost your job. I lost one job. I corrected him gently. The business was already supporting me. Nobody spoke, because suddenly the story they had created about me was falling apart. The struggling daughter, the dependent daughter, the daughter who needed help. None of it had been true. Sarah looked angry now, not embarrassed.
Angry.
Then why didn't you say something? I thought about that for a moment, because it was a fair question. Then I answered honestly. Would it have mattered? Nobody replied. I continued. The night I lost my job, nobody asked how I was doing. My parents lowered their eyes. The first concern was Sarah's car payment. Sarah looked away. The second concern was making me leave. The memory still hurt. Not because of the house. Not because of the boxes. Because of how easy it had been for them. As if my place in the family had always been conditional. Dad looked exhausted. Olivia. I raised a hand gently. Not angry. Just honest. For years, I helped whenever someone needed something. That part was true. When Sarah couldn't cover expenses, I helped. When my parents needed repairs done, I paid. When emergencies happened, I stepped in. Quietly. Without keeping score. Without expecting recognition. But standing there on the deck, I finally realized something. The support had become expected. Not appreciated. Expected. Mom wiped her eyes. We never meant to make you feel that way. I know. And surprisingly, I did know. The problem wasn't cruelty. The problem was favoritism. Years of it. Small moments. Repeated often enough to become normal. Sarah suddenly crossed her arms tighter. You're acting like we did something terrible. I looked at her calmly. You asked who would make your car payment before asking how I felt after losing my job. The words landed harder than I intended. Because they were true. Sarah didn't respond. For once, she had nothing to say. The silence stretched across the deck. Then Dad slowly closed the folder. His voice sounded older than I remembered. I packed her things. It wasn't a question. It was a confession. I nodded. Dad looked away toward the ocean. For several seconds, he simply stood there. Then, he quietly said something I never expected to hear. I'm sorry. Mom began crying. Not dramatically. Just quietly. The kind of tears that come when someone finally sees something they should have noticed years ago. Even Sarah looked uncomfortable. For the first time all afternoon, nobody cared about the beach house. Nobody cared about the ocean view. Nobody cared about luxury. Because the real issue had never been the property. It was how we treated each other. 6 months later, things looked very different. My business continued growing. The beach house remained exactly where it was. My parents worked hard to rebuild our relationship. Not through promises. Through actions. The way trust is actually rebuilt. Sarah eventually learned to manage her finances herself. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And me? I finally stopped measuring my worth by whether other people recognized it. Because standing on that deck taught me something important. The night my parents packed my boxes, they thought I had lost everything. The truth was, I had already built a future they never bothered to see.